Halloween was a special time. The leaves turned bright colors, pumpkins decorated every porch, and kids buzzed with excitement. They wore costumes, carved jack-o'-lanterns, and planned how to get the most candy. But there was something about this Halloween that felt different. As the sun set on Halloween night, the streets filled with laughter and the sound of children running from house to house. Parents watched closely, chatting with each other, while kids rang doorbells shouting, "Trick or treat!" The air smelled of fallen leaves and the sweet scent of caramel apples from the local fair. Among the children was a girl named Emily. She was 10 years old and dressed as a witch. Her costume was black and purple, with a tall, pointed hat that almost fell over her eyes. Emily loved Halloween more than anything. She had been waiting for this night all year. As Emily and her friends filled their bags with candy, they decided to explore a spooky house at the end of the street. The house was old and dark, with boarded-up windows and overgrown bushes. The stories about it scared everyone. Some said it was haunted, while others claimed a witch had lived there long ago. "Let's go check it out," Emily said, her heart racing with excitement and fear. "No way, it's too creepy." Sarah, one of her friends, replied, shivering at the thought. "Oh, come on. What's the worst that could happen?" Emily urged. Reluctantly, Sarah and the other kids followed Emily as she led them to the front door. They stood in front of the house, looking up at its tall, dark shape against the moonlit sky. The door creaked open, as if inviting them in. "See? It's fine," Emily said, stepping inside. The others hesitated but eventually followed her in. The air was cold inside, and the smell of dust filled their noses. The room was empty, with broken furniture covered in white sheets. Shadows danced on the walls as they shone their flashlights around. "Let's explore," Emily said, her eyes shining with curiosity. They walked deeper into the house, moving from room to room. Each room looked scarier than the last, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and strange noises echoing around them. As they moved through the house, they found old photographs on the walls. The people in the pictures looked sad, their eyes staring blankly. Emily felt a chill run down her spine but pushed it aside. She wanted to be brave. In the back of the house, they found a staircase leading to the second floor. "We should go up," Emily said, excited. The others hesitated, glancing at each other nervously. "Maybe we should just stay down here," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "Don't be scared. We can't let a little spooky house ruin our Halloween," Emily encouraged. Slowly, they climbed the stairs, each step creaking under their weight. The second floor was darker than the first, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Emily led the way, shining her flashlight ahead. Suddenly, they heard a loud thud coming from one of the rooms. The sound echoed, making them jump. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably just a raccoon or something," Emily said, trying to sound brave. "Let's go check it out." They walked toward the room where the noise came from. The door was slightly ajar, and Emily pushed it open, her heart pounding. Inside, they found an old, dusty room filled with furniture draped in white sheets. In the corner, a rocking chair moved back and forth slowly, as if someone had just gotten up. "This is so creepy," Sarah said, stepping back. "Stop being such a baby. It's just an old chair," Emily said, rolling her eyes. But even she felt uneasy. Just then, they heard another thud, this time coming from outside the window. Emily jumped, her heart racing. "What was that?" she asked, glancing at her friends. "I think we should go back downstairs," Sarah suggested, looking frightened. "Don't be a scaredy cat. We're not leaving until we find out what's going on," Emily replied, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. The group stood in the room, the rocking chair continuing to sway. Emily looked around, and her flashlight flickered. "What's wrong with this thing?" she muttered, shaking it. "Maybe it's the batteries," one of her friends said, glancing nervously at the door. "Let me try," Sarah said, stepping forward. She took the flashlight, but before she could turn it on, the lights in the room suddenly went out. "Ah!" they all screamed, panic setting in. The darkness enveloped them, and Emily's heart raced. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Sarah cried, her voice shaking. Emily fumbled with the flashlight, trying to turn it back on. When the light flickered back to life, they saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "Who are you?" Emily shouted, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, its face hidden in shadow. "Leave this place," it said in a deep, echoing voice. "Run," Emily yelled, grabbing her friend's hands. They dashed out of the room, their hearts pounding. They raced down the stairs, almost tripping in their hurry. They burst out of the front door and into the night, gasping for breath. The street was filled with other kids, but none of them noticed what had just happened. "What was that?" Sarah panted, looking back at the house. "I don't know, but we have to get out of here," Emily replied, still holding her friend's hands tightly. They ran down the street, away from the haunted house, their bags of candy bouncing with each step. The laughter and chatter of other children faded as they distanced themselves from the eerie place. Finally, they reached the end of the street where a group of parents stood chatting. Emily turned to her friends, breathing heavily. "Did that really happen?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. "It felt real, but maybe we just imagined it." "It couldn't have been real. It was just a spooky Halloween story," Emily insisted, but deep down she wasn't so sure. As they stood there trying to calm down, they saw the figure appear again, standing across the street, watching them. Its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, sending chills down their spines. "There it is," one of Emily's friends shouted, pointing. "Run," Emily yelled, and they all took off down the street, the figure following them. They sprinted to the safety of a nearby house, where the lights were on and laughter filled the air. They banged on the door, desperate to get inside. The door swung open, and a kind-faced woman stood there. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing their frightened expressions. "There's something in the house," Sarah exclaimed, tears in her eyes. The woman looked confused, but quickly ushered them inside. "You kids are safe here. Come on in." They hurried inside, feeling the warmth and light wrap around them. They explained what had happened, but the woman just smiled gently. "You must have let your imaginations run wild. It's just Halloween after all." "But we saw it. The shadow. It told us to leave," Emily insisted, her voice trembling. The woman shook her head. "Don't worry. It's just a scary story meant to thrill you. There's nothing to be afraid of." Emily wanted to believe her, but the image of the figure lingered in her mind. As the night wore on, they joined other children in the house, sharing candy and stories, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She felt like something was still watching her. After a while, they decided to head home. The streets were quieter now, with only a few trick-or-treaters left. The moon hung high in the sky, casting eerie shadows everywhere. "I'll walk with you guys," Sarah said, clutching her bag tightly. "I don't want to be alone." The group nodded, and they walked together, trying to keep their spirits up. But as they passed the old house, they couldn't help but glance over. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The windows were dark, but she could almost swear she saw movement inside. "Did you see that?" she whispered to her friends. "See what?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Something moved in there," Emily said, pointing. "No way, it's just your imagination," one of her friends insisted, but Emily could feel her heart racing. They quickly walked past the house, eager to get home. But as they turned the corner, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. What had happened in the house? Who was that figure? And why did she feel like it was still watching her? She tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every creak of the house made her jump. Just when she thought she might drift off, she heard a soft whisper. "Emily." She sat up, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" But there was only silence. She felt a wave of fear wash over her, and she quickly turned on her bedside lamp, flooding the room with light. Everything looked normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and decided to distract herself with a book. But just as she settled in, she heard a soft thud coming from outside her window. Emily jumped, her heart racing again. She slowly walked to the window, peeking through the curtains. Outside, she saw the shadowy figure standing in her yard, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "No!" she screamed, backing away from the window. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching her. Emily felt panic rise in her chest. She turned to run out of the room but tripped over her blanket and fell to the floor. As she scrambled to her feet, she heard a loud crash from downstairs. "Mom, Dad!" she shouted, but there was no answer. Emily rushed out of her room and down the hallway, her heart pounding. The house was dark, and fear coursed through her veins. She made her way downstairs, the shadows seeming to follow her. "Mom!" she called again, but still there was no response. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw the front door wide open. The night air was cold, and her heart raced. "What's happening?" she whispered to herself. She stepped cautiously toward the door, her hands shaking. The street was empty, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves. Suddenly, she heard a low growl behind her. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The figure stood at the edge of her yard, watching her intently. "Leave me alone," Emily shouted, her voice trembling. But the figure just stood there, unmoving. It felt like a nightmare, and she wanted to run, but her feet felt glued to the ground. Just then, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and Emily turned to see her parents rushing toward her. "Emily, what's wrong?" her dad shouted, looking around frantically. "I saw it. The shadow," Emily cried, pointing to the figure. Her parents followed her gaze, but the figure had disappeared. They looked back at her, concern etched on their faces. "There's nothing there, honey," her mom said gently. "It's just your imagination. Halloween can play tricks on your mind." "No, it was real, I swear," Emily insisted, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. "Let's get you back inside," her dad said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You're just tired from all the excitement." They led her back into the house, and Emily felt a mix of relief and fear. But as her dad locked the door behind them, she glanced out the window and saw the figure standing in the shadows once more. The next morning, Emily woke up to the sun shining brightly. The fear from the night before seemed like a bad dream. But as she got out of bed, the memory of the shadow lingered in her mind. She dressed and headed downstairs where her parents were making breakfast. "Did you sleep okay?" her mom asked, smiling. Emily nodded, though she didn't mention the figure. She didn't want to sound crazy. They spent the day enjoying the Halloween decorations around the neighborhood and eating candy. But as the day went on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. That night, she decided to gather her friends to talk about what had happened. "You guys, I'm really scared about that house," she said, sitting in a circle with Sarah and a few others. "I saw a figure last night." "Stop it, Emily. You're just trying to scare us," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "No, I'm serious. I really saw it," Emily insisted. They talked and joked about Halloween for a while, but as they got ready to go home, Emily noticed that the night felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. "Let's not go near that house again, okay?" one of her friends said as they walked down the street. "Agreed," Emily said, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But as they passed the house, Emily felt a pull toward it. She hesitated, glancing back at her friends. "What if we just look inside one more time?" "No way," Sarah replied. "That place is too creepy." Emily felt torn. She wanted to be brave but didn't want to scare her friends. They continued walking, but the house loomed behind them, dark and silent. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she heard a soft tapping at her window. Her heart raced as she sat up, glancing around her room. "Please don't be the shadow," she whispered to herself. With trembling hands, she walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. The figure stood there, glowing eyes fixed on her. "No!" she gasped, backing away. But this time, she didn't feel frozen in fear. Instead, she felt anger boiling inside her. "What do you want?" she shouted. The figure didn't move. It just watched her, and Emily felt her fear turning into defiance. "You can't scare me. I'm not afraid of you," she yelled. In that moment, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, fading away. Emily felt a sense of victory wash over her. "I'm not afraid," she repeated, feeling a rush of courage. But just as she turned away from the window, she heard the whisper again. "Emily?" She froze, her heart racing. "Leave me alone," she shouted. But the voice grew louder, echoing in her mind. "You must come back." Suddenly, a loud crash came from outside, and Emily jumped. "What was that?" she whispered, glancing out the window again. To her shock, she saw the front door of the haunted house swinging open. A cold wind swept through her room, chilling her to the bone. Before she could think, her legs moved on their own. She found herself walking toward the door, her heart pounding. What's happening? She thought, trying to stop herself. But she couldn't. It was as if the house was calling to her, pulling her closer. She stepped outside into the cool night air, the moon shining down brightly. Emily. The voice echoed again, beckoning her toward the old house. As she approached the front door, she felt a mix of fear and curiosity. The air felt electric, and she could see the shadows swirling around her. Just go inside, she thought, feeling a strange sense of purpose. Maybe I can finally find out what this is all about. With a deep breath, she stepped inside the haunted house once more. The darkness enveloped her, but she felt strangely calm. She moved through the rooms, the familiar creaks and whispers guiding her. "Where are you?" she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. Then she saw it. The figure stood at the top of the stairs, glowing eyes watching her closely. "Why are you here?" Emily asked, her voice steady. "You must listen," the figure replied, its voice deep and resonant. "I have been waiting for someone brave enough to find the truth." "What truth?" Emily asked, taking a cautious step forward. "The house is trapped in a cycle of fear. You must break it," the figure said, gesturing toward the darkened corners of the room. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "How do I do that?" "You must face your fears," it replied. "Only then can you free us all." With determination, Emily nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The figure stepped aside, revealing a dark hallway that led deeper into the house. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked forward, the shadows swirling around her. As she walked, she felt memories flooding back, old feelings of fear, loneliness, and doubt. Each step brought her closer to understanding the darkness that had haunted her. Suddenly the lights flickered, and Emily found herself in a room filled with mirrors. Each reflection showed a different version of herself, some scared, some angry, some brave. "Who are you?" she asked, staring at the reflections. "I am all of you," a voice echoed from the mirrors. "You are stronger than you think." Emily felt a surge of confidence. "I won't let fear control me anymore," she shouted, and the mirrors shattered, releasing a wave of light. The darkness around her began to fade, and the figure reappeared. "You have done well, brave one," it said, its voice softer now. "What happens now?" Emily asked, feeling the weight of fear lifting. "The house is free. You have broken the curse," it replied, its glowing eyes shimmering with pride. As the shadows dissipated, the house transformed. The old walls brightened, and warmth filled the space. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she said to the figure, now glowing softly. "You are the one who faced your fears. Remember, you have the power within you," it said, before fading away into the light. Emily stood alone in the house, feeling a sense of peace. The darkness was gone, and she had conquered her fears. As she stepped outside, she saw the world around her had changed. The street was alive with color, laughter, and light. She looked back at the house, now vibrant and welcoming. "Happy Halloween!" she shouted, a smile spreading across her face. From that day on, Emily knew she was stronger than her fears. She had faced the darkness and come out the other side, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. Halloween was no longer just a time of fear for her. It was a reminder of her courage and the magic that comes from facing the unknown. As the years passed, the house became a place of joy and laughter, filled with children playing and celebrating Halloween. Emily would often visit, sharing stories and laughter with her friends. And every Halloween she would remind them, "Fear is just a shadow. Face it, and you'll